Hi everyone, this is Elias Martin from Collecting Japanese Prints. Welcome to Woodblock Wednesday, where every Wednesday we get together and discuss Japanese prints, paintings, and history. Thanks for joining me again, and I want to thank all of you who are joining me for the first time, or last episode might have been your first time with us. I really appreciate you tuning in, and I just want to sort of let everyone know who is new that I basically discuss prints, but prints found in Japanese or throughout its history. So, I do discuss Edo period prints, and I do offer those on my website, but I also discuss 20th century prints like Shinhanga or Sosakuhanga. And today is Earth Day, and that got me thinking. It's an interesting time we live in. I hope everyone is doing well out there, staying safe, and staying inside if at all possible. And I was thinking, today being Earth Day, there are some positive signs of what's going on. Well, besides the fact that at least in the US, the virus seems to maybe be peaking, though certain areas are yet to experience that. But an interesting side effect is that there's not a lot of fossil fuels being burned, and because of because fossil fuels aren't being used as much, one can argue that the Earth is experiencing sort of a rebirth. So there's some interesting pictures online of different parts of the world where things are a bit more green and the waters seem to be clearer. So not to say that everything's a-okay and climate change isn't real, it's happening. Sorry, my connection's going in and out. But as I was saying, not that climate change isn't real or anything, but perhaps we're experiencing sort of a good side effect to staying home. The less we use of fossil fuels, maybe it's giving the Earth a chance to, reboot maybe. So one can hope, at least. So on this Earth Day, I was thinking about that, and I thought I'd offer that thought with all of you. And so the idea of Earth Day really kind of inspired me to consider what I might show today. And so it's another opportunity to share with all of you the art of one of my favorite artists. His name is Koshiro Onchi. And, and he was a really interesting artist. He was a Sosakuhanga artist, so which means for all of you who just started watching my series, he was an artist that was interested in producing his own prints and doing everything himself. So he carved the blocks, he printed the prints, and of course the designs were his. So Onchi was one of several artists in the early part of the 20th century that was interested in doing these types of prints. He was also interested in abstraction really early on. He produced the first work of abstraction in Japan, in fact, in 1915. And that's very early for an artist to produce abstraction anywhere in the world. But he did that, and that was in Japan. But his abstraction wasn't really understood in Japan, and he decided to do more representational forms of woodblock printmaking in order to promote the genre, Sosakuhanga. And so he spent, from about 1914 onward to about the late 30s, early 40s, doing mostly representational work. And then in the 30s into the 40s, late 30s, there's elements of abstraction started creeping into his artwork. And certainly by the time the war occurred, he was doing work in abstraction. And once the Americans occupied Japan, he made a few really important works that were representational. But by the end of the 40s, certainly by 1950s, his entire body of work is abstract. So, and a lot of those works are just masterpieces. So I wanted to show you today a collection of 3 prints that belong to a series of 4 of his work from 1954. He passed away in 1955, so this is a really wonderful view of his mature style. They're all very important prints done in only a few impressions. So without further ado, let's go to the table and have a look. So I'm going to pan out so you could see the table. And these prints are quite large. Here, I'm going to grab a business card from here to give you a sense of scale. So here's a normal size business card, and I'm panning out. That's about the size of the prints. Now, they're not all exactly the same size. So that's something I'll point out, and I'll bring my business card so you could kind of look at the sizing of each work. But I wanted to show these, well, first of all, because they're so stunning, and they're an important group of work that he produced at the end of his life. But the other thing is, the reason why I wanted to show them today, today being Earth Day, is that all three works were produced with materials that were recycled or repurposed, which I doubt that Onchi was thinking of a sustainable way of producing artwork. I think by and large, the Japanese, particularly at this time, were doing pretty much everything in a sustainable way in terms of producing art. But what he was really thinking about is being inspired by everyday objects that he may have encountered and using them in ways to create powerful impacts in printmaking that were thought-provoking, and they were fresh and they were expressive, and innovative. So I should mention that this trio, he calls them object prints. So there is a series of four. There's 4 prints in the series, and in here in the book, this is sort of Onchi's catalog raisonné. By the way, if you're interested in this book, which I highly recommend, it's the exhibition catalog for the Museum of Modern Art Tokyo. Tokyo's exhibition a few years ago. I actually have copies of this book available for sale on my website. So, or just shoot me an email and I can get you one. But this series you could see here, I don't have this one today to show you. And you could see there are planks of wood that are arranged and printed with different colors and different forms. But here you see the rest of them. And so basically, as I was saying, all 3 prints, or all 4, I don't have the first one to show you, were all produced with found objects. And he called these prints object. So this is there's object number 1 in the catalog, this is object number 2, this is object number 3, and this is object number 4. So that's the titles of the prints. And it's interesting because what inspired Onchi to produce this series, particularly the first few prints, the first 3, I believe, is that he was helping his daughter renovate her home. And in the process of renovating her home, he removed quite a bit of wood from the house that was discarded. They didn't need that in the renovation. And he repurposed the wood. He saw the pieces of wood and thought, wouldn't that be interesting to use in prints? So in this particular case, the entire background is made of different pieces of wood that looks like he cut and he colored, and he used the wood grain to produce certain effects in each particular area in the background of the print. I think that's really interesting. Much like the prints from the Edo period, I've shown those type of prints in a couple episodes back. There was one of a Hershige print of the fireworks. You see in the background of the sky that really beautiful wood grain. Well, you see that again here. And sometimes in this period, some of the artists would actually carve out a wood grain pattern to mimic wood grain. But in this case, I believe, and it's pretty clear that it's actually the natural wood grain from the blocks that he repurposed from, he acquired from his daughter's renovation, which I think is really neat. The other thing that I'd point out here in this print is that these red sort of
they almost look like these forms are alive and they kind of move. They kind of resemble something out of the sea, like shells of some kind. But they're in fact actually pieces of Japanese charcoal that was cut in half. And that charcoal that you may have seen at restaurants and izakayas or somewhere, they look like little nuggets. And so you cut them. Onchi did, and he created this really interesting texture, and he inked these pieces of charcoal, and he impressed them into the print in particular areas. And this was, as far as I can tell, this was done freehand. So there, to my knowledge, there's 3 known impressions, I believe, of this print. There's one at the Art Institute of Chicago, there's one at the Honolulu Academy of Arts, and then this one. He may have produced more, they just haven't surfaced. So those are the 3 that I'm aware of. And but when you look at all 3, the printing of the red forms are slightly different. And it's, as I said, it's because it's done freehand, it's done in a kind of in a spontaneous sort of way. And in the arrangement of them, you feel that. You really feel like it's alive, it's spontaneous. There's this really wonderful conversation of, in the background, wood kind of represents something that's stable, like a wood fence or wood flooring, and then these red forms that seem to animate the design. And, just to quickly, I'll just kind of give you a point of reference. You see this figure here, or this little area here, and then here that almost resembles like a butterfly. You see how close they are here. And in the book, in this impression, which is from the Honolulu Academy of Arts, they're not as close. So you could see that there's a bit more space there. And then here, you see these 2 forms here. They look like they're almost about to touch. And in this impression, they are touching. So this was done, this is an example of Onchi's work, where each impression varies from one to another. He wasn't interested in producing designs that sort of that were mass produced or they were reproduced over and over again. He wanted to imbue into his prints sort of an emotional experience of the artist producing the artwork, as well as what maybe the artist had in mind when he conceived of the design itself. So it's an interesting sort of onion of different layers of how to experience Onchi's prints. And it's really interesting in the sense that, you could look at these prints in books, and if you're lucky to own one, you're going to get a very different impression, possibly a very different experience of the design, which is so rewarding as a collector and as a dealer, being able to find things like this and see things very differently from one impression to another. So I'm going to stop talking for a little bit, and I'm going to zoom in so you can enjoy the print. I want to point out with Onchi, he wasn't interested in producing prints that were very tidy and like perfect. He wanted to express sort of the experience of the artist, as I mentioned. And so he's famous, or maybe infamous, for really sloppy printing. So you see blotches of red here, there's a little bit of red there, and that's not in this impression, though there are interesting little nuances about this print. And so what that means for a fan of Onchi is that you want to look for prints that show the hand of the artist at work. When you're thinking about Yoshida, Hiroshi Yoshida or Hasui, they're very precise prints, and one impression versus another, they're very, very similar. Of course, we can get into a conversation on how Yoshida prints vary, and they do. And this is one of the reasons why Yoshida prints are really a cool thing to collect. But, setting that aside, generally speaking, Shinhanga prints appear very similar from one impression to another. And in Onchi's work, that's very different. And, it's just a really neat thing to see an artist, a print artist, producing artwork and putting so much time and effort and also kind of a spontaneous joy of printing in each impression. So, a lot of people think, well, prints aren't unique. They're multiples. And so for some people, they see prints as the lesser of the art forms, and that painting is the far superior form, partly because they're unique. And I see their point in some ways, but I don't agree. And when I discuss prints and someone poses that argument, I always bring up Onchi as a counter argument to that. Especially, and there are many artists that looked at printmaking in a different way, and not necessarily as in producing the image over and over again. So what you're getting here is a unique experience that Onchi produces from each impression. Now I'll move on to the next one. This is, as I said, this is object number 2. I don't have object number 1, which is in the book, but object number 2, and then here's object number 3. And what I find fascinating about each of the prints in the series is, yes, they're in a series, and the idea that creates kind of a cohesive unity among all 4 is that the objects that he used were found objects, not stuff that he actually made or carved out to mimic the forms, but actually pieces of wood. And some of them are natural forms, some of them he manipulated, but they were all naturally occurring originally. And so in this case, though, the paper is a different paper. It's a different size, and this paper has kind of a sheen to it. And I've seen this print in in a museum before. And it was on the same paper. So it seems like Onchi didn't really care about creating a unity within the series in terms of the size, the format, the type of paper. It was more of the idea of the objects being, stuff that he repurposed that created this sort of arc of the meaning. So in this case, we have these forms that were created again with wood. This wood again is most likely from the wood that was taken from Onchi's daughter's renovation. And, it's interesting. The pieces of wood are inked differently with different pigments, with the different amounts of pigment that create a different intensity. And then, here, this looks like it might be a natural piece of wood. It certainly shows the shape of a tree, a form of a tree. And then you have this dynamic red form that seems to float across the plane. Really cool. And in person, it almost looks like it's alive. The printing is kind of soaked and very animated. So it's very hard to express this or show this on a video online. But if you ever have the ability to see Onchi's prints in person, you'll know what I mean. And it's just a function of how he printed it, with the intensity of colors, with the intensity of the printing application onto the paper, as well as the design itself. I mean, he was a master. So I'm going to zoom in so you could see. And here I'll point out that this is Onchi's signature, Onzi. You see that on his prints, but you also see, sometimes you see a pencil signature. In this case, on this print, it is signed in pencil K Onchi. It's 54. All of these were done in 54, but in this case, he just used his own Z stamp signature. And in this particular design, I'm only aware of two prints out in the world. So this is an extraordinarily rare print, as is this. And then the third one, the series, I know of no institution or private collection that has all four. So, and in fact, I don't know any place that has even more than two. So to have three together it's an amazing thing to have. So I'm going to finish showing you the surface. I'm going to see if I can angle the paper so you could see the background almost has kind of a sheen to it. It almost looks like he probably did print a mica application to the background. And mica it's basically a natural mineral that's used as a kind of an embellishment in prints. It's silver, and it's printed directly onto the surface of the paper. I don't know. It may be the paper itself too, but the paper all around has a really interesting sheen. And when you see this design in person, the silver background makes these forms move forward. It's very interesting. It's much like what the experience, if you've seen prints by Utamaro or by Goyo, where you see a beautiful woman, the beauties that those artists were producing, and they would add a silver background. It sort of brings the figure forward, and this mica is doing kind of the same thing, but also these forms are so lively in person. There's a really wonderful life to this print, really. I'm going to back up so that you could see the prints. And again, just to give you a sense of scale, this is my business card. This is, how large these prints are. Oh, I'm going to show here. Maybe the light, the way that the video will catch it. Do you see that there's this line here? Here, there's this mica, the silver that I was talking about, and here the paper here does not have the mica. So it was clearly printed into the background. So these are interesting printing techniques that artists use to sort of animate and create drama in woodblock printmaking. And the last print in this series, this is object number 4. And I think this print is known in 3 impressions. The Art Institute has an impression, the Honolulu Academy of Arts has an impression, and then this is another one. So this one's known in at least 3, this one is known in 3, and I think this one's only known in 2. And object number 1 is known in at least 2 impressions. So all of these are very rare. And as I said earlier in the video, each impression in some ways is unique because they show very strong differences and different choices Onchi elected to use at the time of printing. So in this print, this is a really interesting design where the background, again, very familiar, the wood grain, probably, most likely, wood grain taken from the blocks that was repurposed from Onchi's daughter's renovation of her home. And what we have in the foreground is this large leaf and a fragment of a leaf here. This looks like a net of some kind or a fabric that gives the effect of a net. It might even be skin from a reptile or fish, who knows? Onchi was known to use all kinds of experimental printing effects in his prints. So, and all of these objects could have easily been acquired by Onchi. And here, I think this, at least to my eye, looks like the sole of a part of a shoe, maybe? It could be it could be a shell, but it has a kind of a shoe sole quality. And I know in another impression of another print he used the soul of a collector, and his name was Oliver Statler, and he was one of the first collectors of Sosaku Hanga, and especially a big patron of Onchi's. And he asked Statler to take his shoe off. And Statler said, okay. And he takes his shoe and he inks it and he stamps his shoe, the bottom part of his shoe, into a print, which is fascinating. That print, there's a couple impressions of that print. One is at the Art Institute. But, so this is why I think this might be a shoe, but it could be anything, really. And so that's really, what I'm trying to get to is Onchi's sort of creativity and seeing the everyday objects as also possible works of art themselves. He does a great job of highlighting the object. So here, you see the beauty of this leaf. As kids, maybe many of you have used the leaves to impress the color onto a paper and create these prints, so you could really see sort of the remnants of the leaf. And he's certainly highlighting the beauty of the leaf. There's another one there, but also then he's combining it and creating this concert of forms that interplay with each other, that seem to sort of float away and then again come back in conversation. He does that with all three prints. I mean, in ways that it's very hard to convey in a video. So I encourage all of you to read up on Onchi, and certainly if you're in town or in an area where you could see Onchi prints, I highly recommend doing that because they're fantastic. And I think he's arguably one of the best, if not the best, 20th century printmaker that Japan's produced. So I'm just going to back up so you could see how large these prints are compared to my table. My table is really large. It's about 5.5, 6 feet going across. So you could see how long it is, and it's about 8, 9 feet long. So I'll zoom in on each work so you could see them again one last time. And for those of you who just joined me, I encourage all of you to sort of watch the video from the beginning and kind of get a sense of what we're doing today. Well, I want to thank all of you for joining me today on Woodblock Wednesday. Today was inspired, as I said, by Earth Day. And, so all of the prints that I showed today were produced with found or repurposed objects. And they were all done by Koshiro Onchi, a very important 20th century printmaker from Japan. And I encourage all of you to read up on him. And I want to just say a few last words on where we're at. I want to encourage all of the people who are watching to please, if you can, stay home and stay safe. And of course, there's wonderful resources online to learn more about Japanese artwork, Japanese prints. Feel free to check out my website, collectingjapaneseprints.com. Of course, I have a lot of references available, as well as prints, but really I've halted operations on selling prints for now. I just want everyone to stay safe, and we'll certainly be discussing new acquisitions on my website in the coming weeks. But for now, take care of yourself, and I look forward to seeing all of you next week for the next installment
of Woodblock Wednesday. So thanks again. Bye-bye.